Hey there, buddy. We are here in the beautiful Devesa Park where there is literally a circus in town. Hoy vamos a hablar las diferencias ir a bici entre los Estados Unidos y España y esta parte de Catalunya. So before we get into it, a couple of things. I'm going to say Spain, even though technically we are in Catalonia. But I think for the most part, this list of things should apply countrywide from what we've seen and experienced so far. So the first difference, la primera diferencia, is the bathrooms or lack thereof. I didn't really realize that in the States that there's just a ton of public bathrooms. Nearly every park or shopping center you go to, there's going to be bathrooms there. Here so far in our experience in this part of Catalonia, that's not the case. There's definitely lots of public spaces. Plaza's awesome park here, which actually does have one restroom. But I found that as we ride from town to town, you can't really bank on there being public restrooms so much. And if there is a public restroom, there's a good chance that there will be no toilet paper. So quick tip from our experience, if you're visiting Spain, definitely travel with like a small packet of tissues. And also know that you aren't going to necessarily be able to rely on public bathrooms. Typically what most people do is they'll stop at a cafe, have a nice civilized break, and use the restroom there before you leave and before you continue with your ride. Next big difference is food. If you're used to North American breakfast, you know it's big. There's potatoes and bacon and eggs and all this stuff. Fuel for your ride if you're going out in the morning. That is not the case here. Spanish breakfast tends to be fairly light, usually just a coffee and a croissant or some other pastry. So that has taken some adaptation. Typically, we still cook breakfast at home, just because that's still what we're used to before we go out on a ride. Another interesting difference is energy bars or lack thereof. They're not really a thing here. There are a couple of shops that sell some, but in terms of variety of Cliff bars and all the other stuff that you have in the States, you don't really have that here. We've generally shifted from just carrying a few Snickers for emergencies and counting on a cafe stop mid-ride for more sustenance. A third super noticeable difference here in Spain is the drivers or driving culture. One thing you will realize right off the bat, especially if you're coming from the US, is just how much more chill the drivers are. We'd heard of this before coming here and thought it was an exaggeration, but we'll go up on climbs where it's like a steep and windy road and the car will slow down, wait behind you until it's safe to pass. Generally speaking, I mean, there are, oddballs here and there, but generally speaking, people are really chill. They will wait until it's safe, oftentimes multiple minutes, even though you're trying to get them to pass, and then they will pass by really courteously, muy tranquilo. Something that we're still getting used to and just absolutely love about riding here in Catalonia. Related to the drivers is the size of cars. It's so nice to go on a ride in the country on these narrow roads without having like some kind of behemoth of a truck breathing down your neck. That's not to say that there aren't larger American-style pickups. They're definitely a rarity and stand out, but for the most part, a lot of the roads here are really narrow and it just doesn't make sense, so you don't see them as often. Same thing with adventure mobiles and RVs. It's not that they don't exist, but it's far less frequent, and it makes the riding experience on these narrow country roads that much better. A third thing that's really different, and we've alluded to this in the past, is the nature of the gravel roads. This might be specific to this region of Catalonia, but it's not uncommon to have a BTT, mountain bike or hiking route that goes right in the middle of someone's farm. It's usually signed and it's okay, but that is not something you would see in the States. There would be all sorts of, private property signs, someone standing out there with a shotgun. But here you can have a sign route that runs literally through someone's field. That's not to say that there aren't private property signs, but it's not as in your face as it is in the US. Another huge and noticeable difference, and that might be specific to Girona, is that the base level of fitness is super high. I mean, this is literally where pros and ex-pros live and train. So going out on the social ride is super intimidating because it's a lot more Ks than we're used to and a lot of climbing at a faster pace. I've spoken to a lot of people and that seems to be the general consensus. that the Catalonian people are just really active. You'll see really old people hiking or walking in the hills. So beyond just cycling, the base level of fitness in this region, in Spain, in Catalonia, is really high. So what that means for us specifically at the moment is trying to ramp up our fitness so we can actually join some of these social rides. Another really noticeable difference that we're still trying to negotiate around is the bike culture. I was talking to a local rep and he was describing it. It's either road or mountain. Gravel is still kind of an emerging thing, but they don't have the same alternative cycling scene that we have in the States. No ciclismos alternativos. I was trying to explain the whole alt cycling scene to this dealer I was working with, showing him some pictures from the gram. He was very surprised, right? No licra y pedaling in sandales. Very strange and very rare here in Spain at the moment. So that's definitely one thing I miss about the States, is that there is a little bit more of an alt cycling scene, but who knows, maybe it'll pop up in the future. That leads to another phenomenon, and that's some bike cultural things don't translate well, like this whole notion of coffee outside, where cyclists would gather and bring coffee making supplies to another place. I was talking to some locals about that concept, and their reaction was, why? Why would you do that when there are literally cafes all over the place? It just doesn't make sense. That also then trickles into things like bike packing. A lot of the sentiment here is, why would you, load your bike up with all this camping gear when you can go to a town and get a pretty nice room for like 50 euro. And this makes total sense. When we were living in Montana, you go out like 20 miles and you're in the woods. There's nothing, you have to be super self-sufficient. But here there are a ton of small towns. There's usually some kind of plaza and a bar there. You can usually get food, and there's generally accommodation that's not very expensive. Like for the equivalent of 60 bucks in the US, you'd get a really crappy hotel room, if you can even find a room for like 60 bucks. Here, when we were here, we did a bike packing trip out to Catalonia, and we're able to get our own separate bungalow, whitewashed walls, super charming, for about, I believe, about $100. So a little bit more, but you get a lot more for your money here in Spain. Another big difference, which affects me personally running this YouTube channel, and it's kind of related to the lack of alternative cycling culture here, is it's kind of hard to get the parts I'm interested in. I can get access to super roady parts and super roady bikes. Same thing with the mountain biking stuff, but in terms of alt bikes, ATVs, not so much. There's a few shops that cater to that market in Barcelona, but none here in Girona. It's something I definitely have to figure out to continue to make hack videos and just make videos around the types of cycling we like to do. I have found some pretty interesting builders, again, mostly in the major cities. There's a bike brand called Nua Bikes that's making really interesting titanium adventure bikes. There's another bike brand that makes a folding cargo bike that folds similar to a Brompton, and all sorts of other mini velos in Barcelona. I don't know if there are many independent bike packing bag makers in Spain. If you guys know of any, definitely leave those in the comments below. If you guys want to know more about our move here, definitely join us on Patreon. That's where we're sharing more personal updates about the visa process, finding an apartment, and getting settled here. If you want to support the channel, definitely join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, and as always, keep the supple side down.